Hi YouTube. I am what they call a project IT manager. That might sound like an IT project manager, but moving those words around is actually a little bit more important than perhaps most people realize. My role is kind of like a hybrid role. It's a bit like doing IT operations and IT project management in the same role. Now you might say, well, how is that different from just being an IT manager? IT managers direct projects all the time, and that's true. But what makes my role different is the team I work in, all of the people that do my kind of thing, we're all trained in a project management methodology, and we could all be project managers in our own right. And that's not to say your average IT manager couldn't be, but IT managers and IT project managers usually have different focuses, different things that they're accountable for. In this role, we usually do all the things that project managers do. We are accountable to things like steering groups. We build schedules, we build budgets, and we manage those budgets. We manage risks and changes and all of those kind of things. So in that regard, it is just project management. But where a project manager and an IT manager start to differ is when we start thinking about things that are business as usual. So an IT manager looks after your operational needs. That is hiring staff, arranging cover for staff, disciplinaries. There's usually a budget piece in there as well that you're responsible for, arranging training, dealing with people's one-to-ones, making sure that your staff and anyone else that you're responsible for in the IT management role are keeping up with their mandatory training requirements. So that's things like cybersecurity training and other compliance related matters. Now I've done these two types of roles for quite a while, or three types of roles I should say. I've been an IT manager or head of IT, those kinds of job titles. I have been a project manager for several projects, and I've been a project IT manager for several projects. Now when I'm the IT manager, the project management is always there, but it's usually light touch. And when I'm the project manager, things like staffing issues, they're not really my problem. In fact, as a project manager, my job is to raise resource requests, and usually it's for IT managers or functional teams such as a server support team, etc. Provide me with a resource. Definitely don't deal with disciplinaries. I might still be responsible for training, such as training people upon whatever we're working on in the project. Nothing to do with business as usual. That's got nothing to do with the project manager. The very definition of a project is something that isn't business as usual. So is this role unusual? I think it is kind of unusual. I've only ever seen it in companies that deal with very large infrastructure projects. And when I talk about infrastructure projects, I mean things like roads, dams, oil processing facilities, pipelines, that kind of thing. In those kind of organizations, what we would typically see is a company that's split into business functions. The company is divided up or siloed up into different functions. You usually have your overhead departments, and that's people like IT. Unfortunately, for most companies, IT is just an overhead, it's just a cost. HR, accounting, the facilities team, the people that look after the offices. And then you usually have your core business functions. Okay, and these are the things that actually generate income for you. In the organizations that I work in, that tends to be various flavors of engineering. So that might be process engineering, civil engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, construction, project management. Project management in the types of industry that I'm in, project management is an entire function, and companies like the one I work for, they can win work just on their project management skills and their previous experience of running these huge projects. And sometimes, well, ideally, the company wins a piece of work that taps into all of their business functions, such as engineering, construction, and project management. And sometimes the company might only win one of those pieces of work, and project management is one that they win quite often. So it might be where construction comes from a cheap Chinese competitor, but the end client, whoever that may be, may want someone with a little bit more experience or someone that has a better reputation in the industry for their project management. So we might come along and sit down with a project management team and basically just help a construction company that's based out of China deliver a project for a client. And between the pair of us, or sometimes multiple parties, we end up delivering something that hopefully the client's happy with. These kinds of organizations that I've worked with anyway, they're usually global in nature. I think they have to be able to compete, because you need to be able to tap into resources from all across the world. And you need a presence in most markets, although quite often you don't necessarily need to have an entire business unit in Kazakhstan, for example. you might only need your sales team. But either way, this is a global business. Now, what that means is each of those functions, your IT, your HR, your engineering, they're often replicated throughout the world in different centers. And sometimes that's for business relationships, and sometimes again that's just to tap into the resources that are available in those markets. Whilst we might only have a sales team in Kazakhstan, in somewhere like India we probably have all of the functions, and somewhere like China we may only have one of our engineering functions, for example. This can get complex because there is usually a series of hierarchies. Sometimes you report into managers in your local business, you might report into managers in your region, or you might report into managers on a global level. In fact, most of the functions report into at least one global function, and that global function is the one that's responsible for overall governance. Things like policies, processes, what we are allowed to do, what we aren't allowed to do, what training everybody in the business needs to take, what training only regional people might need to take. Due to the size of the companies, that's kind of an interesting circle. These kind of very large companies tend to only go for very large projects, and very large projects are only ever awarded to very large companies. So in order to get there, you need to win and successfully deliver lots and lots of small projects, and then medium projects, and eventually get to the large and the very large projects. The competitors at the company that I work with, it's quite a small number. So the number of places I can take my experience and directly relate it to another job, it's not that great. That said, it does change. Sometimes you get right to the very top and the company can basically collapse under its own debt. Sometimes you go through a period where you're not very competitive and you start slipping down the pecking order and you start bidding for smaller projects just to keep your staff employed. And at the same time, some of those medium-sized competitors, they're getting better and they've got a lot of experience, they've got a lot of cash on their hands, and they're starting to bid against us for big projects. So although the number of competitors we have is generally quite small, it is an ever-changing group of companies, and sometimes we slip out of the very large infrastructure project list, and sometimes we are king of the list, I guess. But as a project IT manager, I usually find myself in two parts of the business. Okay, so we have what we call the bid phase and the execution phase. At the bid phase, this is where we're essentially trying to win the next piece of work, or a piece of work that's a little bit down the pipeline. We've got a global sales team and they're always looking for opportunities. We need to receive something like an invitation to tender from the end client. We need to scour that document and come up with a bid which will allow us to deliver it successfully. So sometimes we can decide on the timeline, sometimes we are given a timeline and we have to work out what it would take for us to deliver in that period of time. But mostly we've defined a timeline. And essentially we bring subject matter experts from every single business division, and basically we create like a shadow business as an entire copy of the organization, but it's on a much smaller basis. So whereas there might only be one IT manager in the bid team, there might be 20 IT managers in the global organization. Both the bid team and the project team would usually be geographically dispersed. Now that is partly to tap into experts from across the world. We've got staff in nearly every country, and partly because it allows us to offload some of the work to cheaper parts of the world. That's how these kind of businesses stay competitive. During the bid, every single person on the bid team will essentially be working to try and estimate exactly what it will cost to deliver that project, what equipment we would need, how many staff, and all of those things are used to what challenges do we think, build up what we think the cost would be. In addition to that, every single person in the bid team will be reporting to at least two managers. So you will be reporting to a bid specific manager and you will be reporting to a governance manager. Partly we do that to make sure that the governance team is aware of what demand they might face in the future, because perhaps we need to hire more IT managers, or they need to help us shuffle around staff, or they need to track the project on a global level as well. When the bid is successful, obviously they are always successful, but the ones that are, when that piece of work is awarded to us, we essentially spin up another shadow organization. This one will be on a much larger scale. Again, every single function that's required on that project will be duplicate of what we've got in the global organization anyway. That team will not all spin up at once. We might start with 30 people, and at peak we could have anywhere up to 15,000 people. That's the most I've personally seen on a project, but I suppose there could be more. Our organization doesn't swell to hire 15,000 people, for a single project. What normally happens is when you win a project, you set up basically like a limited entity that is owned wholly by my employer and exists just for the purpose of delivering that project. That entity will hire staff as and when required. And a lot of that staff will be what we call craft. So it is the people that are out there banging sheet metal, digging holes, that kind of thing. This is where my job role really kicks in. This is where we become the IT manager for that project. Sometimes it's not the entire project. We might only be needed during key phases, such as the startup phase. And the startup phase may end by us hiring an IT manager to see it through the next phase. Let's say the startup phase takes 18 months. At the end of 18 months, or somewhere in that 18 months, I might need to hire a local IT manager who will then be responsible for day-to-day running of the project for the next 2, 3, 4 years, at which point that person is released back into their local job market and someone like me comes back in to deal with the close down of the project. When we do win a project, it's very likely that I was one of the people that was involved in the bid, though not always, because I might still be tied into a project. I may have bid on this project, then being assigned to a different project whilst we were waiting to find out if the bid won. And when the bid won, I'm in too deep, or I'm in a key phase of the execution of a different project, so I cannot be released, at which point we'll tap into someone else from the team. So the first thing would be to validate the bid. If I was the one that generated the IT bid, I'm probably fairly familiar with it. Imagine how quickly prices could have changed. Sometimes the time between when you submit a bid and when you are awarded a bid, it could be like 18 months or more. You can imagine how much prices could have changed in that time. And we may have lost people that we had assumed would be part of the business. So we may have lost expertise for whatever reason that we assumed would be part of the business that we accounted for when we built the bid. And so now we might need to bring in some external consultants to help us deliver a bid because we no longer have that knowledge in the company. So we need to go through and evaluate all of that stuff. I may not have been involved in the bid at all, in which case it's completely new to me and I need to read the ITT. I need to read terms of the sales contract to see what we've agreed to commit to and then see if those items land inside the bid. Sometimes we did a very thorough IT estimate and yet the sales team, in order to make us appear more competitive, slashed like 10% of our budget or something. So then we have to go away and either ask for that money back and usually make a business case because we need it, or try and find another way of delivering that project on a tighter budget. So I will need new estimates, I will need new shopping lists, I will need a final staffing list, although that can obviously change as we go through the life of the project. I might start working on visas for experts from around the world to go into certain countries. Quite often we have a local requirement for a certain amount of the local workforce to be used. And that's for a very good reason, because if they're paying a company to build something for them, they want their local population to benefit from it, or their national population to benefit from it. So sometimes we have to hire 70, maybe 90% of the workforce in country. Sometimes we have to buy at least 30% of all of our IT equipment in country. Sometimes you just have to buy globally. There aren't many IT companies that are building server-grade equipment in Algeria, for example. Those companies are usually global companies. Mostly the part is made in China or Taiwan or something anyway. So it's never quite clear-cut. Any staff we hire for the project need to be trained up so that they meet my global functions governance requirements. So for example, I'm hiring staff for a project in Uganda. Those people are hired for the sole purpose of delivering the project in Uganda. However, in order for them to have access to Active Directory, for example, they would need to follow any required training and security checks that the global governance team for the people who are in charge of Active Directory that they've deemed a requirement. As I hire staff, it's my decision who I hire, but those staff need to go through training, usually remote training. Sometimes, if they're very lucky, they get a free trip to the US or something, but mostly it's remote training before we'll sign off on allowing those people to access Active Directory. I will have to give regular updates to the project director for the project. And the project only sees us as being an overhead department. They know they need IT, but we are just eating into the project's profits. The project director is ultimately responsible for the overall success of the project. He will be keen to make sure I manage my budget, and I will have to get approval from him or her, usually, for any significant spend. So the project cares about what we would normally consider to be the business as usual things, like do all of the staff that need laptops have laptops? Do all of those perhaps 15,000 craft? They don't all need laptops, but they need to be able to log into kiosk machines to record their time so that they get paid. As an IT manager, my job is to make sure all of that IT is in place and working, and if not, then the project director wants to know why. Whereas the governance group, the people who I report to on a global level, those people want to know more about the project management. They want to know how I'm managing my schedule, how I'm managing my budget, who my stakeholders are, how I'm keeping them informed, what my communication strategy is. Do I have any issues with global staffing? Do I have any issues with other managers across the business that are impeding my delivery? So although the project management is kind of like second place to operations, it is nonetheless important. And that's where we need people that are trained in a project management methodology so that they understand how all of those pieces fit together, and they can understand how and what the global team need to hear in order to be satisfied that we are actually doing our job properly. So the focus is not on the project management. We use project management tools and methodologies to basically make sure we don't drop the ball. That isn't where the focus is. Focus is on supporting the project. A project that could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars for our parent company. Nobody wants $1 billion project failing to meet key milestones because IT didn't buy enough licenses for the engineering team to do the design, for example. A large-scale project could take anything from probably 18 months at the smallest to 7 years or more perhaps to deliver. Unlikely that I would ever be on a single project for 7 years. I would do what we call the startup phase because one of the critical phases. Sometimes there are other critical points throughout the project, but usually the ones that we focus on are the startup phase because that's where we get everything right. That's where we make sure we put things in place. We order the long lead items. We get staffing in place. We recruit local IT managers. We build relationships with local suppliers. We vet the suppliers. And ultimately, once we've got a local team recruited, trained, and delivering, it's less critical. There's no way I could fill my 40 hours a week working on a project where I've already got local staff in place and we've gone through the critical startup phase. So what would normally happen is I would step back, go back into my global pool. When I'm in the global pool, when I'm not on an actual infrastructure project, my primary role would be to support any of the projects that I'd set up. If any of those local IT managers need to go on holiday, usually that work will fall to me. And sometimes projects that are other people's projects, the IT manager goes on holiday, they might need someone like me to help out with anything from the BAU stuff or the project management stuff, dealing with the reports and presentations we have to make to the global leadership teams. And if none of that's available, then I just get stuck on another bid team. Some of the things that we will build might take us 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years to build it. But then that thing, whatever it is, might be in service for 10, 20, maybe more years. Luckily, I get to work from home quite often. Most of the time, I'm basically just fielding video calls, emails, checking schedules, checking what people have committed to and making sure they are delivering, helping people get over impediments. It's a really interesting mix of IT operations and IT project management. I quite enjoy it. It isn't what I want to do going forward. Well, thank you for watching YouTube, and if you do have any questions, hit me up in the comments below and I will happily help.